In 2023, the most famous footballer on earth left Europe and signed for a club most people had never heard of. The deal was worth over $500 million. Then the second most famous player did the same, then the third. By the end of that year, Saudi Arabia had spent more money on football than almost any country in a single transfer window in history. This is the story of what they were actually buying, because it was never really about the football. To understand what is happening, you have to understand the country behind it. Saudi Arabia is home to around 35 million people, and it sits on the second largest proven oil reserves on the planet. That oil built one of the wealthiest states in the world. But oil does not last forever, and the people running Saudi Arabia know it. At the center of everything is one man, Crown Prince Mohammed Bin Salman, usually known by his initials, MBS. Still in his 30s, he has effectively controlled the direction of the Saudi government since 2017. And he has staked his entire reputation on a single project called Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is Saudi Arabia's official plan to rebuild its economy so it no longer depends on oil. The logic is simple. The oil money is still flowing today, but the reserves are projected to decline within decades. So the question that drives the whole strategy is this: what does Saudi Arabia become after the oil? The answer they have chosen is tourism, entertainment, and above all, sport. It is worth grasping how big this ambition really is. Vision 2030 includes building entire new cities from scratch, most famously Neom, a futuristic mega project rising out of the desert. It means opening the country to foreign tourists for the first time, reviving cinemas that had been banned for decades, and staging concerts and festivals that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. And sport is the most visible piece of that whole puzzle. They are not the first Gulf state to try this. Qatar hosted the 2022 World Cup. The United Arab Emirates bought Manchester City and built a Formula One circuit in Abu Dhabi. Bahrain has its own Grand Prix. But Saudi Arabia is doing something none of them did. It is not just buying into football's existing structures, it is buying the players themselves. For most of modern history, the Saudi Pro League barely registered on the global map. As recently as 2023, it was ranked somewhere around the 20th best league in the world, behind Portugal, behind the Netherlands, a league that almost nobody outside the region actually watched. Then, in a single summer, that changed. In the 2023 transfer window, Saudi clubs spent a record $957 million. That was nearly half of what the entire English Premier League spent that same summer, on a league nobody was watching. And look at who they bought. Cristiano Ronaldo arrived first in January 2023 on a contract reported to be worth around $200 million a year. Then came Karim Benzema, who left Real Madrid as the reigning Ballon d'Or winner, the best player in the world, for a reported $100 million a year. Neymar left Paris Saint-Germain. Jordan Henderson walked away from Champions League football at Liverpool. Roberto Firmino, Fabinho, N'Golo Kante, Ruben Neves, the list just kept growing. But here is the part that matters most, and the part most people miss. The four biggest clubs in Saudi Arabia, Al Nasser, Al Hilal, Al Ahly, and Al Ittihad, are not private businesses. They are majority owned by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the PIF. This is the country's sovereign wealth fund, with well over $700 billion in assets, holding stakes in Apple, Uber, electric car maker Lucid, and hundreds of other global companies. So these clubs are not chasing profit. They are instruments of state policy. When they sign a player, that is not a football decision. It is a government decision. The profits do not matter. The visibility does. And football is only one front in a much wider campaign. The same public investment fund bankrolled LIV Golf, the breakaway tour that split the golf world in 2022, and pushed the storied PGA Tour to the negotiating table. It brought Formula One to a brand new street circuit in Jeddah on a 10-year deal. It turned Riyadh into a global capital of championship boxing, luring the biggest fights on earth to the desert. It even bought naming rights across professional tennis. Step back from the noise, and the real picture comes into focus. This is not simply a football project. It is a plan to place Saudi Arabia at the very center of global sport itself. Football just happens to be the biggest prize of them all. And the contradiction was obvious from day one. The football was not competitive. The best players in Europe were not flying to Saudi Arabia to win the Champions League. The global verdict was instant and brutal. It is a retirement league, a place where aging stars go to cash one final check. Maybe. But there is a counter-argument worth remembering. That is exactly what the world said about Major League Soccer in America back in 1996. And look how that turned out. So if it is not really about the football, what are they actually buying? There are three serious answers, and they are not mutually exclusive. The first is reputation. Critics call it sportswashing, using sport to soften and rehabilitate a country's image on the world stage. Saudi Arabia's record draws heavy international criticism. The 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, restrictions on free expression, the criminalization of homosexuality, and the imprisonment of political dissidents. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and much of the international press described the football spending as an attempt to change the subject. The Saudi government rejects that framing. It argues that this is real economic development under Vision 2030, building industries, jobs, and entertainment for a young population, more than half of which is under 35. And here is the uncomfortable truth for the critics. As a public relations strategy, it is working. Today, news coverage of Saudi Arabia is just as likely to be about Ronaldo's latest goal as about its human rights record. We've seen this pattern before: the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the Russia World Cup in 2018, Qatar in 2022. Every time during the event, the conversation drifts toward the sport. The second answer is the 2034 World Cup. In December 2024, FIFA officially awarded Saudi Arabia the right to host the 2034 tournament, and the process was extraordinary. There was effectively no competition. The bid was uncontested, confirmed by acclamation. To host a World Cup, you need stadiums, infrastructure, global visibility, and the support of FIFA's members. Saudi Arabia is building the stadiums, constructing the infrastructure, purchasing the visibility, and cultivating those relationships. The spending spree and the World Cup bid are not two separate stories. They are the same strategy pointing at the same target. To pull it off, Saudi Arabia plans to build or rebuild around a dozen stadiums, including a futuristic arena in Neom said to sit hundreds of feet above the ground. But the bid also drew warnings. Human rights groups pointing to what happened in Qatar before 2022 cautioned that a construction program on this scale could put migrant workers at serious risk. Saudi organizers say they are committed to reform and to protecting workers' rights. How that plays out over the next decade is one of the biggest open questions hanging over the entire project. The third answer is the most ambitious of all. Saudi Arabia does not just want to host football, it wants to become a football nation. Remember, at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, Saudi Arabia beat Lionel Messi's Argentina 2-1. Argentina, who went on to win the entire tournament. It remains one of the great upsets in World Cup history. Saudi Arabia has now qualified for the 2026 World Cup, in North America, their 7th appearance. And the Saudi Federation is actively recruiting players of Saudi heritage from around the world. The same dual national model that nations like the United States and Morocco have used to punch above their weight. Which brings us to the player's dilemma. Look closely and a pattern appears. Ronaldo was already past his peak. The money made sense and his legacy was secure. Benzema had already won everything in Europe. But Jordan Henderson is the cautionary tale. He went to Saudi Arabia, was criticized relentlessly, and left after just 6 months to join Ajax in the Netherlands, taking an enormous pay cut to get back to European football. The trend is clear. Players aged 31 and over tend to choose Saudi Arabia. Players in their mid-20s, in their absolute prime, stay in Europe. The real test is still coming. The day a 26-year-old superstar, at the very top of his game, chooses Riyadh over the Champions League, that is the day we will know that money has permanently changed football. But the boldest move was not in Saudi Arabia at all. It was in the northeast of England. In October 2021, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund bought Newcastle United, a Premier League club, for around £305 million, taking an 80% stake. Newcastle is a historic working-class English club with a passionate fan base that had not won a major domestic trophy since 1969. After the takeover, everything accelerated. New investment, new signings, a top 4 finish, and a return to the Champions League within 2 seasons. Here's the critical detail. This was not a billionaire buying a hobby. The Saudi state, through its sovereign wealth fund, was directly involved. When the Premier League and UEFA raised concerns about state ownership, they could not stop the deal. It went through. And that is the real lesson of Newcastle. Once Saudi money is inside European football, it is extremely difficult to remove, and it may be impossible. This collides with a power struggle already shaking the sport at the very top. For years, European football, led by UEFA, has effectively run the global game. But FIFA, the world governing body led by Gianni Infantino, has its own ambitions, and increasingly, its interests align with the new money flowing out of Saudi Arabia. The tension between the European establishment and FIFA's global expansion is the most significant fault line in football governance in a generation. Tens of billions of dollars of Saudi investment shifts the balance of power. For the first time in football's history, the center of gravity is moving away from Europe. And you can already see the money seeping into the European game in quieter ways. Saudi state companies and tourism brands now sponsor clubs, competitions, and broadcasts that millions of fans watch every single week, often without ever noticing where the money comes from. The influence does not always wear a Saudi jersey. Sometimes it is simply a logo on a sleeve or a name on a stadium or an advert behind the goal. And the next test arrives in the summer of 2026 on North American soil. Saudi Arabia will be there with a squad built from its own league and its new recruits. Let's be honest and realistic. They are not favorites. They are not even dark horses. But then again, They were not supposed to beat Argentina either. If Saudi Arabia were to reach the knockout rounds in 2026, it would validate this entire project in front of the largest audience the sport has ever had. So where does this leave football? Broadly, there are two possible futures, and the truth is, nobody yet knows which one we are heading toward. In the first future, Saudi Arabia wins. The Public Investment Fund keeps acquiring clubs. The Saudi Pro League keeps climbing, pushing toward the global top 10. The 2034 World Cup is a genuine success, and football becomes a truly global sport, with power no longer concentrated in a handful of European capitals. Is that a bad thing? Honestly, it depends entirely on your values. In the second future, Europe holds the line. UEFA and the Premier League introduce real limits on state ownership and spending. The flow of stars to Saudi Arabia slows and then reverses. The Saudi Pro League contracts, and the whole project is remembered as an expensive power play that did not quite work. Is that the better outcome? Again, it depends on what you value. Here's the honest answer. Neither future is guaranteed. But one thing is already certain. Football in 2034 will look nothing like football did in 2014. The Saudi investment has already permanently reshaped transfer fees, player salaries, and the politics of FIFA itself. There is no going back to the way things were. The 2026 World Cup is the last major tournament before Saudi Arabia's hosting era truly begins. In a strange way, it may be the last chance to see football as we have always known it, right before the transformation is complete. But Saudi Arabia is not the only country that used football to rewrite its own story. There is a far smaller nation with a fraction of the resources that has been doing something similar for 3 decades, and did it so well that today it is one of the most influential forces in the entire sport. They built that power with exactly one thing, one specific player. Next time, we are telling that story. And it does not begin in a boardroom or a government office. It begins on a street in Buenos Aires, with a child who was told he was simply too small to ever become a professional footballer. And the rest of that story changed everything.